The galaxy had fallen silent. Not the peaceful silence of calm nights or quiet mornings, but the heavy silence that comes after great destruction. It was the silence of defeat, of broken spirits, of hope that had finally died. For 300 cycles, the Valorian Dominion had swept across the stars like a plague. They came with massive warships that blocked out the light of suns. They came with weapons that could turn entire cities to ash in seconds. They came with armies that numbered in the billions, soldiers bred for war and nothing else. And they came with a simple message for every species they encountered: submit or die. Most chose to submit. Those who did not were erased from existence. The Kreeth were among the first to fall. They were a proud warrior race, tall and powerful, with scales like armor and hearts full of courage. They fought bravely against the Dominion for nearly 50 cycles. Their fleets met the invaders in battle after battle. And for a time, it seemed like they might actually win. But the Dominion had endless resources and endless soldiers. The Kreeth did not. One by one, their worlds burned. One by one, their fleets were destroyed. In the end, the survivors were rounded up and sent to labor camps across the galaxy, their proud civilization reduced to slavery. The Andari fell next. They were a peaceful species, more interested in art and diplomacy than war. They tried to negotiate with the Dominion, to find common ground, to appeal to reason and compassion. The Dominion had no interest in negotiation. They saw the Andari as weak, and weakness was something to be exploited. The Andari homeworld was conquered in less than a single cycle. Their beautiful cities were torn down and replaced with factories. Their libraries were burned. Their people were scattered across refugee colonies on the edges of known space, living in poverty and despair. The Sylvani, the Tauran, the Vex, the countless other species that had built civilizations among the stars. All of them fell before the Dominion. Some fought harder than others. Some surrendered quickly. In the end, it made no difference. The result was always the same. The final battle came at a place called Nexus Prime. It was a space station at the center of a massive nebula, a place where the last free fleets of the galaxy had gathered for one final stand. Ships from a dozen different species came together, setting aside old conflicts and ancient grudges to face their common enemy. For a brief moment, hope flickered in the darkness. That hope died quickly. The Dominion brought a fleet so large that it took hours for all the ships to arrive. The Allied forces were outnumbered 10 to 1. The battle lasted less than a day. When it was over, the nebula was filled with wreckage and bodies, and the Dominion stood victorious. High Commander Zorath, the leader of the Dominion forces, addressed the conquered galaxy from the steps of the Grand Citadel on Valoria Prime. He was tall even by Valorian standards, with cold gray skin and eyes that held no warmth or mercy. He spoke in a voice that was broadcast to every corner of known space. "The war is over," he declared. "The galaxy belongs to the Dominion. All species will serve us. All resistance has been crushed. This is the new order of the universe. And it will last forever." And so it seemed that it would. On a forgotten moon called Threshold Station, a small group of survivors gathered in secret. They were the last remnants of the resistance, the final few who had managed to escape the destruction at Nexus Prime. There were perhaps 100 of them in total, representing half a dozen different species. Admiral Vorn of the Kreeth was their leader, though he would have laughed at anyone who called him that. He was old now, his scales faded and scarred from countless battles. He had lost everything: his family, his friends, his entire world. He had lost so much that he had forgotten what it felt like to have anything worth losing. He stood before the gathered survivors in a small meeting room that smelled of recycled air and desperation. His voice was tired as he spoke. "We have nothing left. No ships worth mentioning. No weapons that could threaten the Dominion. No allies who might come to our aid. I have called this meeting not to plan our next attack, but to discuss how we might survive. Perhaps we can find a world far from Dominion space, somewhere they will not bother to look. Perhaps we can live out whatever time we have left in peace." Ambassador Kellis of the Ondari sat in the corner of the room, listening in silence. She had once been one of the most respected diplomats in the galaxy, speaking before councils of great leaders and negotiating treaties between powerful nations. Now she wore the simple clothes of a refugee and had not spoken to anyone of importance in years. She had no words of hope to offer, because she had no hope left to give. A young Sylvani woman named Tessa worked at a communication station nearby. She was barely more than a child, one of the few of her kind who had survived the fall of her homeworld. Her job was to monitor transmissions, to listen for any sign of Dominion activity that might threaten their hiding place. It was boring work, and she had stopped expecting to hear anything important long ago. But on this day, something different happened. A signal appeared on her screen, coming from a direction she had never monitored before. It came from beyond the outer rim, from a region of space that the Dominion had declared empty and lifeless. The signal was strange, using frequencies and encryption methods she had never encountered. She almost dismissed it as interference, or a malfunction in her equipment. Then the signal resolved itself into a message. It was being broadcast in over 100 different languages, including her own. The words were simple and clear. This is the United Earth Coalition. We have been watching. We are coming. Tessa stared at her screen for a long moment. Then she ran to find Admiral Vorn, her heart pounding with something she had not felt in a very long time. Hope. 300 years earlier, a Dominion scout ship had entered a small solar system on the far edge of the galaxy. The system had 9 planets, orbiting an average yellow star, and the scouts were looking for resources to fuel the war machine. They scanned each world carefully, recording mineral deposits and atmospheric conditions. When they reached the 3rd planet from the Sun, they found something unexpected: life, intelligent life. The creatures called themselves humans. They lived on a world they called Earth, a planet of blue oceans and green continents. The scouts observed them from a safe distance, gathering information about their civilization. What they found was not impressive. The humans were divided into hundreds of separate nations that constantly argued and sometimes fought with each other. Their technology was primitive by Dominion standards. They had only recently learned to travel beyond their own atmosphere, and their spacecraft were slow and fragile things that could barely reach their nearest neighboring planet. They had no weapons that could threaten a Dominion warship. They had no defenses that could stop a Dominion invasion. The scout commander sent his report back to Dominion Command. "The humans are insignificant," he wrote. "They pose no threat and offer nothing of value. I recommend we ignore them and move on to more important targets." His superiors agreed. The Dominion placed warning beacons around the human solar system, marking it as quarantine territory. They did not bother to make contact with the humans or warn them about the wider galaxy. They simply moved on, forgetting about the small blue world and its primitive inhabitants. It was the greatest mistake the Dominion ever made. The humans saw the warning beacons. They detected the scout ship before it left their system. They intercepted transmissions from the wider galaxy and learned about the war that was consuming everything. They watched as species after species fell before the Dominion, and they understood that their own world would eventually face the same fate. But the humans did not despair. They did not accept their future destruction as inevitable. Instead, they did what humans had always done when faced with impossible challenges. They prepared. The nations of Earth put aside their differences for the first time in human history. They formed a single government called the United Earth Coalition and dedicated every resource they had to a single goal: survival. Human scientists studied the technology they observed in Dominion transmissions. They captured the warning beacons and took them apart, learning how they worked. When alien probes occasionally drifted into their system, they captured those too. Every piece of technology was examined, understood, and improved upon. Human engineers built shipyards in secret, hidden on the dark side of their moon and in the asteroid fields beyond their planets. They constructed warships using designs that combined human innovation with reverse-engineered alien technology. They developed weapons that were more powerful and more efficient than anything the Dominion had ever created. Human soldiers trained for a war they knew was coming. Generation after generation, They prepared themselves for the day when they would face the conquerors of the galaxy. 300 years passed. The humans watched and waited and built. General Nathan Cole stood on the bridge of the UEC Defiance, the flagship of the United Earth Coalition fleet. He was a tall man with gray hair and steady eyes that had seen more than most people could imagine. He had spent his entire life preparing for this moment, as had his father before him, and his grandfather before that. Through the view screen, he could see the assembled armada. 2,000 warships stretched across the darkness of space, their hulls gleaming with weapons that the galaxy had never seen, carriers loaded with fighter craft, battleships armed with railguns that could punch through any armor, destroyers equipped with experimental energy weapons developed by human scientists who had taken alien technology and made it better. Captain Lauren Mitchell approached him with a data tablet in her hands. She was his second in command. A woman who had proven herself in countless simulations and training exercises. This would be her first real battle. And she was ready. "The fleet is prepared," she reported. "All ships have confirmed their readiness. Jump drives are synchronized and awaiting your command." Nathan took the tablet and looked at the status reports. Everything was green. Everything was ready. 300 years, he said quietly. That is how long we have waited. 300 years of watching innocent species suffer. 300 years of building our strength in secret while the galaxy burned around us. Lauren nodded. Some historians will question why we waited so long. They will ask why we did not intervene sooner. Nathan turned to look at her. If we had revealed ourselves earlier, we would have been destroyed. The Dominion would have come for us before we were ready, and Earth would have joined the list of conquered worlds. We had to wait until we were strong enough to win, and now we are. Nathan allowed himself a small smile. Now we are. The Dominion thinks the war is over. They think they have won. They are wrong. He walked to the center of the bridge, where his command chair sat surrounded by tactical displays and communication stations. Every member of his crew watched him, waiting for the order they had trained their entire lives to receive. Nathan Cole sat down and looked at the stars beyond the view screen. Somewhere out there, billions of beings lived in chains. Their hope destroyed, their futures stolen. Somewhere out there, the Dominion celebrated their victory, confident that nothing could challenge their power. They were about to learn how wrong they were. Nathan opened a communication channel to every ship in the fleet. His voice was calm and steady as he spoke. This is General Cole. For 300 years, humanity has prepared for this moment. Our ancestors watched the galaxy fall into darkness, and they swore that we would one day bring back the light. Today, we honor that promise. Today, we show the universe that freedom is not dead. Today, the Dominion learns that their war is not over. He paused for a moment, looking at the faces of his crew. They were young and old, men and women, all of them united by a single purpose. All ships, Nathan commanded, engage jump drives. It is time for humanity to enter the war. The fleet vanished into faster-than-light travel, leaving behind only the empty darkness of space. The galaxy was about to meet humanity, and nothing would ever be the same. Commander Dravik of the Dominion cruiser Sovereign Will was having an ordinary day. He had been stationed at Outer Marker 7 for nearly 2 cycles now, watching over a region of space that nothing ever happened in. It was boring duty, the kind given to officers who had disappointed their superiors but not badly enough to be executed. His patrol fleet consisted of 600 warships, more than enough to crush any resistance that might appear. Not that any resistance ever did. The war was over. After all, everyone knew that. Dravik sat in his command chair and watched his sensor officer run the same scans they ran every day. There was never anything to find. The nearest enemy territory was 100 light-years away, and even if the conquered species still had any ships, they would never be foolish enough to come here. Commander, the sensor officer said suddenly, I am detecting unknown contacts emerging from faster-than-light travel. Dravik raised an eyebrow. How many contacts? The officer checked his readings twice before answering. 200 ships, sir. Configuration unknown. They are not in our database. Dravik leaned forward in his chair. A scouting party, perhaps. Some desperate remnant of the resistance making a final foolish gesture. He had heard stories of such things happening in other sectors. Small groups of rebels who refused to accept their defeat, launching attacks that accomplished nothing except getting themselves killed. "Open a communication channel," he ordered. The view screen flickered to life, showing a creature unlike any Dravik had ever seen. It appeared to be a female, with pale skin and dark hair and eyes that showed no fear at all. She wore a military uniform that was unfamiliar to him, and she was smiling. "Unidentified vessels," Dravik said in his most commanding voice. "You are in Dominion space. Power down your weapons and prepare to be boarded. Resistance will result in your immediate destruction." The female creature's smile grew wider. "Dominion vessel? This is Captain Samantha Perry of the United Earth Coalition. You have 10 seconds to surrender. After that, we will not be asking again." Dravik actually laughed. He could not help it. This creature, this unknown being from some forgotten corner of the galaxy, was threatening him? His fleet outnumbered hers 3-1. His ships were the finest the Dominion had ever built, and she was demanding his surrender? "You dare threaten the Dominion?" Dravik asked, still chuckling. "You will learn the price of your arrogance. All ships, attack formation. Destroy them." The Dominion fleet moved forward with practiced precision. 600 warships activated their weapons and prepared to annihilate the enemy. The battle lasted 4 minutes. Dravik watched in disbelief as his fleet was torn apart. The human ships moved with speed and agility that should have been impossible. They weaved between Dominion formations, dodging fire that should have destroyed them. Their weapons punched through Dominion shields as if they were made of nothing at all. Railgun rounds, traveling at incredible velocities, ripped through armored hulls. Energy weapons that Dravik had never seen before sliced cruisers in half. Missiles that somehow avoided every defense system found their targets with perfect accuracy. Ship after ship exploded around the sovereign will. Dravik shouted orders, but no one could hear him over the chaos. His crew was running in every direction, trying to contain fires and seal breaches and do something, anything, to stop the destruction. Then the lights went out. The sovereign will drifted powerless in space, its weapons destroyed, its engines crippled. Dravik picked himself up from the floor and looked around at the wreckage of his bridge. Most of his crew was dead or injured. Sparks flew from damaged consoles. The view screen flickered with static before finally coming back to life. Captain Samantha Perry's face appeared again. She was not smiling anymore. Her expression was calm and serious. "We told you to surrender," she said. "You chose not to listen. Now, your fleet is destroyed and your ship is crippled. I am not going to destroy you, Commander. I am going to let you live so that you can send a message to your High Commander." Dravik stared at her, unable to speak. His entire body was trembling. He had never known fear like this. Had never imagined it was possible to feel so completely helpless. "Tell Zorath that humanity is no longer watching from the sidelines," Samantha continued. "Tell him that the species his scouts dismissed as primitive and insignificant has been preparing for this moment for 300 years. Tell him that every ship he sends against us will meet the same fate as yours, and tell him this most of all." She leaned forward, her eyes locked on his. The war he thought he won, it just started over. The transmission ended. Dravik sat in the darkness of his ruined bridge, surrounded by the bodies of his crew and the wreckage of his fleet. He had served the Dominion his entire life. He had believed in their power, their invincibility, their destiny to rule the galaxy forever. Now he knew the truth. The Dominion had made an enemy they could not defeat. An enemy they had created through their own arrogance and cruelty. An enemy that had been waiting in the shadows, growing stronger with each passing year. Humanity had arrived, and Commander Dravik, who had laughed at their demands for surrender just minutes before, now understood that the galaxy would never be the same. He activated the emergency communication system and began recording his message to High Commander Zorath. His hands were shaking so badly that he could barely operate the controls. His voice cracked as he spoke, but he delivered the message exactly as the human captain had demanded. The conquered species heard whispers of the battle within days. A new force had appeared. An unknown species had challenged the Dominion and won. Hope, that dangerous thing that the Dominion had worked so hard to destroy, began to spread through the galaxy like a fire that could not be stopped. On Threshold Station, Admiral Vorn received the news and felt something stir in his old warrior's heart. "The humans," he whispered. "They actually did it." Beside him, Ambassador Kellis wept tears of joy. The war was beginning again. The news spread faster than any ship could travel. In labor camps on distant worlds, prisoners whispered to each other about the strange new species that had defeated a Dominion fleet. In refugee colonies on the edges of known space, families gathered around communication devices to listen for any scrap of information. In the grand halls of Dominion power, officers spoke in hushed voices about an enemy they did not understand. High Commander Zorath received the message from Commander Dravik and watched it 3 times before destroying the device he had used to view it. He had never known fear in his life, but something cold settled in his chest as he listened to the trembling voice of his defeated officer. The humans. The species his ancestors had dismissed as worthless. The primitive creatures from the forgotten blue planet. They had been preparing for 300 years. Zorath immediately ordered his fleets to abandon their occupation duties and return to key strategic positions. He doubled the defenses around Dominion territory. He sent his best commanders to investigate this new threat and destroy it before it could grow any stronger. He was too late. General Nathan Cole launched the United Earth Coalition offensive 3 weeks after the victory at Outer Marker 7. His plan was bold and aggressive, striking multiple targets at once across dozens of light years. He did not wait for the Dominion to recover from their shock. He did not give them time to adapt or prepare. The humans hit them everywhere at once. The Kalos system was one of the first major targets. It was a heavily fortified Dominion stronghold that controlled vital supply lines to a dozen other systems. If Kalos fell, the entire Dominion defensive network would begin to collapse. Nathan led the assault personally from the bridge of the Defiance. His fleet numbered 1,500 ships, including vessels from other species who had already joined the human cause. The Dominion had brought 500 ships to defend the system, along with orbital defense platforms and ground-based weapons. Commander Ryan Brooks, his chief tactical officer, studied the enemy formations with a worried expression. "They have fortified everything, sir. Direct assault would cost us heavily. Our casualties could be severe." Nathan nodded slowly. "Then we do not assault directly." He turned to the holographic display that showed the battlefield. His finger traced paths through the enemy defenses as he explained his plan. "We send our stealth fighters first. They target communication relays and sensor stations. Once the Dominion fleet is blind and unable to coordinate, we hit their supply ships. Without supplies, they cannot fight for long. Without communication, they cannot organize an effective defense." The Phantom Wings launched within the hour. These were humanity's stealth fighters, small and fast and nearly invisible to sensors. They slipped through Dominion defensive lines without being detected and struck their targets with perfect precision. Communication relays exploded. Sensor stations went dark. Command ships lost contact with their squadrons. Within hours, the Dominion fleet at Kalos was in chaos. Ship captains tried to follow their last orders without knowing what was happening around them. Some attacked targets that were no longer there. Others held position while enemies surrounded them. Their coordination, their greatest strength, had been taken away. Then, the main UEC fleet arrived. The battle was fierce but one-sided. Human ships tore through Dominion formations with devastating efficiency. Kreth warships, crewed by warriors who had spent years as slaves and were now fighting for their freedom, showed no mercy to their former masters. Ondari vessels provided support and coordination, their crews finally able to use their skills for something other than survival. Station by station, ship by ship, Kalos fell. Commander Katie Sullivan led the first wave of Marines onto the surface of Kalos 4. This world had been home to millions of Kreth before the conquest. Now it was a labor camp, its population forced to work in mines and factories to support the Dominion war machine. Katie was a young woman with short brown hair and eyes that had seen too much suffering for someone her age. She had studied the reports from intelligence officers. She knew what they would find when they reached the camps. She was not prepared for the reality. The prisoners were barely alive. They had been worked nearly to death, fed just enough to keep them functioning, treated worse than animals. When the human soldiers broke down the gates of the first camp, the Kreth inside did not run or cheer or celebrate. They simply stood there, staring, unable to believe what they were seeing. Katie walked among them, her weapon holstered, her hands empty and open. Medical teams followed behind her, already beginning to treat the injured and sick. An elderly Kreth woman approached her slowly. Her scales were dull and cracked, her body bent from years of hard labor. Tears ran down her face as she reached out and grasped Katie's hand. "Why?" the old woman asked in a voice that cracked with emotion. "Why do you help us? You do not know us. We are nothing to you." Katie knelt down so that she was at eye level with the woman. She spoke gently, the way you might speak to a frightened child. "You are not nothing. You are people who have suffered greatly, and we have the power to help you. That is all the reason we need." The old woman collapsed into Katie's arms, sobbing with relief and gratitude. Around them, other prisoners began to realize that this was real, that they were truly being rescued. Cries of joy rose up from the camp, spreading from person to person like a wave. Word of human compassion spread through the galaxy alongside word of human military victories. The species who had been conquered learned that these newcomers from the forgotten blue planet were not just powerful warriors, they were liberators who treated the defeated with dignity. They were healers who cared for the sick and wounded regardless of species. They were builders who helped repair what the Dominion had destroyed. Admiral Vorn traveled to Kilos to meet with General Cole after the system was secured. The old Kreth warrior looked at the human general with something close to reverence. "My people will never forget what you have done for us," Vorn said. "We will fight beside you until the Dominion is destroyed." Nathan shook his hand firmly. "We do not fight for gratitude, Admiral. We fight because it is right. But we are honored to have the Kreth as our allies." One by one, the conquered species joined the coalition. One by one, the liberated worlds added their strength to the cause. The Dominion was beginning to crumble, and they had no idea how to stop it. High Commander Zorath had ruled the Dominion for over 100 cycles. He had conquered more worlds than any commander before him. He had crushed every enemy who dared to challenge his power. He had built an empire that stretched across half the galaxy. Now that empire was falling apart. In 6 months, the humans had liberated 37 systems. Every fleet he sent against them was defeated. Every strategy his commanders devised was countered. Every weapon they deployed was matched or surpassed. The species that the Dominion had enslaved were rising up everywhere, joining the human coalition, turning against their former masters. Zorath gathered his remaining forces at Valoria Prime, the heart of the Dominion itself. If the humans wanted to end this war, they would have to come to him, and he would make them pay dearly for every step they took. 3,000 warships assembled in orbit around the Dominion homeworld. Hundreds of orbital defense platforms surrounded the planet like a ring of steel. Millions of soldiers waited on the surface, prepared to fight to the last breath. It was the greatest defensive force in galactic history. Zorath stood in his command center and looked at the tactical display. "Let them come," he whispered. "Let them see the true power of the Dominion." Across the galaxy, General Nathan Cole stood in the war room of the Defiance, surrounded by the leaders of the coalition. Admiral Vorn of the Kreth was there, his scarred face showing grim determination. Ambassador Kellis of the Ondari stood beside him, no longer the broken refugee she had once been. Commanders from a dozen other species filled the room, all of them united by a single purpose. "This is it," Nathan said quietly. "Everything we have fought for comes down to this moment. Valoria Prime is the heart of the Dominion. If we take it, the war ends." Captain Lauren Mitchell displayed the tactical analysis on the main screen. "They outnumber us 2 to 1. Their defenses are formidable. This will be the hardest battle we have ever faced." Nathan looked around the room at the faces of his allies. Some of them had been fighting the Dominion for their entire lives. Others had joined the cause only recently. All of them knew that many of them would not survive what was coming. "I will not lie to you," Nathan said. "This battle will cost us dearly. Many of us will not see tomorrow, but I have also seen what happens when good people refuse to fight. I have seen the graves. I have seen the labor camps. I have seen the destroyed worlds. We fight not because we want to, but because we must. Because if we do not, no one will." He paused, letting his words settle over the assembled commanders. "Today, we end this. Today, we show the Dominion that their reign of terror is over. Today, we give the galaxy its future back." The Coalition fleet jumped to Valoria Prime at dawn. The Battle of Valoria Prime was the largest military engagement in the history of the galaxy. For 12 hours, human and allied ships clashed with Dominion forces in a maelstrom of fire and destruction. The darkness of space was lit by the flash of weapons and the explosions of dying ships. Human pilots flew mission after mission until their bodies were exhausted and their minds were numb. Kreth warriors fought in brutal boarding actions, clearing Dominion stations room by room. Ondari engineers performed miracles, keeping damaged ships running through willpower and improvisation alone. Captain Samantha Perry led her squadron in a desperate assault on the primary orbital defense platform. It was the key to the entire Dominion defensive network. If it fell, the rest of the defenses would crumble. Her ship was damaged badly in the approach. Half her crew was dead. Her weapons were nearly empty. But she kept flying, kept fighting, kept pushing forward. When she reached the platform, she had only one option left. "All hands, abandon ship," she ordered. "Get to the escape pods, now." Her crew obeyed without question. They knew what she was planning. They knew she would not be joining them. Samantha aimed her ship at the platform's main reactor and accelerated to maximum speed. In her final moments, she opened a communication channel and spoke one last message. "Tell them we held the line." The explosion destroyed the platform and opened a gap in the Dominion defenses. The Coalition fleet poured through. Nathan Cole led the final push himself. The Defiance broke through the last defensive perimeter and entered orbit over Valoria Prime. Below, the Dominion homeworld stretched out like a gray jewel, its surface covered with cities and military installations. In his command center, High Commander Zorath watched the tactical display change from red to blue as his forces fell one by one. His officers were shouting reports at him, each one worse than the last. The fleet was destroyed. The orbital platforms were gone. Coalition ground forces were landing on the surface. It was over. For the first time in his life, Zorath understood what defeat truly meant. The surrender was unconditional. Dominion forces across the galaxy laid down their weapons and accepted their fate. 300 cycles of conquest and tyranny had come to an end. General Nathan Cole walked up the steps of the Grand Citadel on Valoria Prime. These were the same steps where High Commander Zorath had once declared victory over the galaxy. Now they were filled with representatives from every species the Dominion had conquered. Kreth and Ondari and Silvani and 100 others stood together, watching, waiting. Nathan turned to face them and began to speak. "We came not as conquerors," he said. "We came as those who refused to accept that cruelty and oppression were the natural order of things. We came because we believed that freedom is worth fighting for, that compassion is stronger than tyranny, that the true measure of any civilization is not the worlds it conquers, but the lives it protects." He paused, looking out at the diverse crowd before him. They were the survivors of impossible suffering. They were the ones who had refused to give up hope, even when hope seemed foolish. The Dominion believed the war was over when they crushed your worlds. They were wrong. The war was never over. It was only waiting for those willing to stand up and fight. Today, that fight is finished. Tomorrow, we begin building something better. Together, the crowd erupted in cheers that echoed across the planet and beyond. Ambassador Kellis wept openly, clutching the hand of Admiral Vorn, who was crying as well. On the steps of the Grand Citadel, beneath the light of a foreign sun, the galaxy celebrated its freedom. The war was over. A new era had begun, and humanity, the forgotten species from the small blue world, had changed everything.